The grand conference room buzzed with energy, filled with dignitaries from across Africa and Europe. Dark wood panels glowed under the warm lights. Cameras flashed like lightning, their clicks blending with the low hum of whispered conversations. It was supposed to be just another polished speech, another day of handshakes and polite nods. But that's not what happened. At the front of the room, a polished mahogany table stretched across the stage. Powerful men and women sat behind it, their faces calm, practiced. Some wore crisp suits, others wore traditional African attire. Each carried the weight of influence and wealth. Their eyes flickered with impatience as they waited for the routine presentations to end so they could return to their business deals. Then Traoré stood up. He was young, maybe in his late 20s, but his eyes burned with a fire that no one could ignore. His suit was simple, a bit worn at the edges, but he wore it like armor. He cleared his throat, and the room fell silent. Cameras swung toward him, capturing every detail. The sweat on his brow, the tight set of his jaw, the determination in his eyes. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice trembling just enough to show his humanity. "Today, I cannot stand by any longer. I refuse to be silent while our people suffer, while our lands are robbed, while the bosses, the ones you call leaders, steal our future." Gasps rippled through the room. A few dignitaries shifted uncomfortably. A man in the front row whispered to his neighbor, eyes darting nervously toward Traoré. The air grew thick, almost suffocating, as if the walls themselves leaned in to hear what he would say next. Traoré's eyes scanned the room, lingering on the faces of the men and women who had grown fat on corruption. He saw fear, anger, and something else, guilt. "What I'm about to reveal," Traoré continued, his voice rising, "will shatter alliances and expose a hidden truth that has been buried for decades. The truth about the stolen wealth, the bribes, and the suffering they've caused. And I will name names." The cameras froze on him. The room went silent. In that moment, every heart beat a little faster, and so began a reckoning that would change everything. Traoré wasn't born into power. He was the son of a miner, one of thousands who spent their days deep underground, chipping away at the earth to fill the pockets of the rich. His father's hands were rough and calloused, the lines in his palms darkened by years of sweat and dust. Traoré remembered the cough that had started when his father was still young, a dry, hacking sound that refused to go away. Every day his father would come home tired, his face lined with exhaustion. Traoré had watched as that cough turned into something worse, something that stole the light from his father's eyes. While his father grew weaker, the bosses who ran the mines grew richer, driving new cars and building mansions on the hills. Even as a boy, Traoré had felt the injustice burn like a fire in his chest. He learned early that power didn't always wear a uniform. Sometimes it looked like the man in the suit who came to the mine once a month, who shook hands with the local officials and left with briefcases full of promises. Sometimes it looked like the politician on TV, smiling and saying all the right words, while quietly signing deals that sold the country's wealth to the highest bidder. As Traoré grew older, he started to see the bigger picture. There were whispers in the town, stories of secret meetings between Western businessmen and local leaders, deals that traded the country's resources for personal gain, contracts that locked the people into poverty while a select few lived like kings. It was a web of corruption so tangled that even good men were caught in its threads. Traoré's mentor, an old teacher named Issa, had once pulled him aside after a heated debate at the university. Issa's eyes were tired, his voice low. "Be careful," he had warned. "This system is older than both of us. If you fight it, you'll make powerful enemies. They don't just silence voices, they destroy families." Traoré had listened, but the fire inside him only grew. He couldn't forget his father's cough, or the quiet desperation on his mother's face when she couldn't afford his medicine. He couldn't forget the children at school who came barefoot because their parents had no money for shoes. He knew that silence was the real killer. One night, in a cramped office lit by a single lamp, Traoré found what he needed: It was a box of documents left behind by a whistleblower who had fled the country. Inside were contracts, bank statements, and letters that detailed exactly how billions of dollars had vanished from the country's accounts. Money that should have built schools and hospitals. Money that could have saved lives. Instead, it had been siphoned off to private accounts in foreign banks, hidden behind shell companies and secret deals. His hands shook as he read the pages. Each word felt like a betrayal. Every signature was a knife in the back of his people. He could almost see the faces of the children who would never go to school, the mothers who would die in childbirth, the fathers who would collapse in the mines, their lungs filled with dust. Traoré's mind raced. Exposing this would be dangerous. He remembered Isa's warning, powerful enemies, his mother's worried eyes, his own doubts. But he also saw the faces of the miners, the children, the families who had nothing. And he knew he couldn't stay silent. He took a deep breath. He would speak the truth, no matter the cost. The next morning, Traoré stood tall as he prepared for the conference. The documents were tucked inside his briefcase, heavy with secrets and promises of change. He knew that once he opened that briefcase, there would be no going back, but he also knew that his father's voice would never forgive him if he stayed silent. With that thought burning in his chest, Traoré stepped out into the bright sun, determined to bring the web of corruption crashing down. The grand conference room seemed even bigger that morning, filled with dignitaries dressed in their finest suits and dresses. The air was thick with tension, like a storm waiting to break. Flashes from cameras bounced off the polished floors, capturing every anxious glance and whispered conversation. Traoré stood at the podium, his heart pounding so hard he thought it might burst. The documents he had carried, evidence of a system that had stolen from his people, felt like a weight in his briefcase. He could see the faces of the bosses in the front row, their eyes cold, their smiles practiced. They had built walls of power and money to keep men like him out. But today he planned to tear those walls down. He cleared his throat, the microphone catching every sound. The room quieted. Even the reporters, always eager for a story, seemed to hold their breath. Traoré's hand trembled slightly as he spread the papers out in front of him, but his eyes were steady. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice firm but heavy with emotion. "Today I stand here not just for myself, but for every miner who coughed his life away underground, for every mother who buried her child because there was no hospital, for every family who went to bed hungry while these men grew fat from our pain." A murmur swept through the crowd. Security guards at the edges of the room stiffened, their hands twitching near their radios. Some dignitaries shifted in their seats, glancing nervously at one another. A few tried to stand, but the reporters surged forward, blocking the exits with cameras and questions. Traoré held up a stack of papers, his voice rising. "Here," he said, "are the bank statements that prove it all. Money meant for schools and hospitals and clean water, stolen by the very people who swore to protect us." He flipped through the pages, his hands steady now, as if his father's spirit were guiding him. These documents show billions siphoned off to private accounts. Money that could have saved lives. A gasp rippled through the crowd. One of the bosses, a man with slicked back hair and a gold watch, stood up, his face red with anger. "This is a lie," he shouted, his voice trembling. "This is nothing but a cheap trick to gain power." Traoré's eyes blazed. He pointed, a finger directly at the man. "Sit down," he said, his voice calm but deadly serious. "I have your name right here." He slapped a page down on the podium. "Your signature, your offshore account, your betrayal of every single person who trusted you." The man sank back into his seat, his face pale. Reporters shoved microphones forward, capturing every word. Traoré took a deep breath, his voice cracking slightly as he continued. "I remember my father dying slowly in that small room. I remember the way his breath rattled, the way his hands trembled when he tried to hold mine. He made me promise that I would fight for the men who had no voice, the men who gave their lives so these bosses could buy new cars and mansions. Today, I keep that promise." He paused, letting the silence fill the room. His eyes swept over the crowd. Some were shocked, others angry, but a few, just a few, looked like they understood, like they were finally seeing the truth. Traoré's voice grew stronger. These men, he pointed at the row of dignitaries, each one shifting uncomfortably under the weight of his gaze. They are not leaders. They are thieves. They have stolen our future, our hope, our very lives. They signed contracts with Western companies that turned our land into a battlefield, our people into slaves, and they smiled while they did it. Security guards moved closer, eyes watchful, but no one dared to interrupt. The reporters' cameras clicked, their lights flashing like tiny stars in the darkness. Traoré leaned forward, his voice low but sharp as a blade. I name you now. I name you so the world will know your crimes. He began to read off the names one by one, each one a nail in the coffin of their power. With every name, the tension grew, the walls of the conference room pressing in like a vice. Faces turned, pale. Some dignitaries tried to hide behind their hands. Others reached for their phones, desperate to control the damage. But there was no controlling the truth now. It was out there, bright and unstoppable. Traoré's eyes burned with tears, but his voice never wavered. My father died with dust in his lungs. He died because of you. He slammed his hand down on the podium, the sound echoing like a gunshot. No more silence, no more lies. The crowd erupted. Reporters shouted questions. Cameras swiveled wildly, and the dignitaries' protests turned into a chorus of denials and angry threats. Security guards reached for Traoré, but he stood firm, eyes blazing. As the noise rose, Traoré took a step back, breathing hard. His chest ached, but his heart felt lighter than it had in years. He had done what he promised. He had kept his father's promise. The world would never be the same again. And as the guards moved in, he lifted his chin, knowing that the truth had finally been set free. The moment Traoré's last words faded into the air, the conference room exploded into a wave of noise and confusion. Angry shouts echoed from every corner. Cell phones buzzed and rang, lighting up screens like tiny beacons of panic. Some dignitaries leaped to their feet, faces red with fury, while others scrambled for the exits, only to be met by a wall of cameras and determined reporters. Traoré, a voice shouted from the crowd. How do you respond to these accusations? Are you afraid for your life? Cameras were everywhere now, their red lights blinking, recording every second. Reporters waved microphones, shouting questions that drowned each other out. Traoré's heart pounded, but he stood his ground. His father's promise burned like a torch in his chest. He would not back down. Not now. One of the bosses, an older man with a silver tie pin and cold eyes, pushed his way toward Traoré, his lips curled into a sneer. Listen, young man, he hissed, his breath hot and sour. You don't know who you're dealing with. Take this. He slipped a folded piece of paper into Traoré's hand. It's more than you'll ever earn in 10 lifetimes. Walk away, and this all goes away. Traoré felt the paper tremble in his fingers. He glanced at it, an account number, a promise, of wealth beyond his wildest dreams. His stomach turned. He crumpled the paper and dropped it to the floor. My people's lives aren't for sale, he said, his voice steady even though his hands were shaking. Another dignitary, a tall man with a thin mustache and nervous eyes, stepped forward, his hands raised in a placating gesture. Now, Traoré, let's be reasonable, he said, his voice oily and smooth. Think of your family, think of your future. You can't change the world overnight. Traoré's jaw tightened. I'm not trying to change the world overnight, he replied, his eyes burning with resolve. I'm trying to tell the truth, and if that means shaking the world, then so be it. The tall man's smile vanished. His eyes hardened. Then, you've made a powerful enemy, he spat. Reporters closed in, recording every word. Some dignitaries tried to shield their faces from the cameras. Others called their lawyers, their fingers trembling on the keys. Suddenly, a group of young people pushed through the crowd, some with homemade signs, others chanting Traoré's name. Traoré, Traoré, we stand with you. Their voices rose above the chaos like a battle cry. One girl, her eyes shining with tears, reached out to him. My brother died in that mine, she said, her voice breaking. You're the only one who ever cared. Don't give up now. Traoré swallowed hard. The weight of their hope settled on his shoulders like a mantle. He straightened his back, feeling his father's presence beside him. A journalist with a battered camera leaned in. Traoré, she asked breathlessly, how do you respond to the threats, the bribes, the chaos? Are you afraid? Traoré's eyes swept the room, at the bosses who once seemed untouchable, now exposed and desperate. At the reporters, their pens scratching furiously. At the young activists, their faces bright with determination. He shook his head slowly. No, he said, his voice ringing clear. I'm not afraid, I'm angry. I'm angry that for decades these men sold our future to the highest bidder. I'm angry that families like mine suffered while they feasted. And I'm angry that the world let it happen. A hush fell over the room, the cameras capturing every tear, every tremble of his voice. Even the dignitaries fell silent, their threats dying on their lips. Traoré's fists clenched at his sides. But I'm also hopeful, he continued, his voice rising. Because I see the people in this room who care. I see the young people who refuse to be silent. I see the journalists who refuse to look away. Together we can rebuild what they tried to destroy. A security guard stepped closer, tension in his eyes. Sir, we have to escort you out for your safety, he said, his hand resting on his radio. Traoré shook his head. I won't run. If they want to silence me, they'll have to do it in front of the whole world. He looked directly into the nearest camera. And the world is watching. The reporters surged forward again, voices overlapping in a sea of questions. Traoré, what's your next step? Will you press charges? Are you afraid of retaliation? How can people help? Traoré raised his hand, the room falling silent. Once more, his voice, though trembling with exhaustion, held steady. My next step is justice. We will take these documents to the courts. We will bring these men to trial, and we will demand that every stolen dollar be returned to our people. But I can't do it alone. I need every one of you to stand with me, every mother, every father, every son and daughter who ever dreamed of a better future. We cannot be divided any longer. The crowd erupted in cheers. Even some journalists wiped away tears, their cameras still rolling. A group of activists unfurled a banner that read, Justice for the People, and chanted his name. Some reporters turned their cameras toward the dignitaries, their faces pale and sweat-slicked. The silver tie boss tried to slip away, but a group of reporters cornered him, microphones thrust in his face. Did you know about the stolen funds? They demanded. Did you sign those contracts? Where's the money now? His protests were drowned by the sea of questions. The tall man with the mustache glared at Traoré, his lips curling into a snarl. You've made enemies today, he said, his voice cold and low. Watch your back. Traoré didn't flinch. I'd rather die standing up than live on my knees, he replied, his voice hard as iron. The noise rose again, a storm of voices and flashing lights. Traoré felt the eyes of the world on him. The pressure was almost too much to bear, but he refused to bend. This was his moment. His father's promise had carried him this far, and now the people were rising with him. As security guards finally cleared a path, Traoré looked out over the chaos, at the crying families, the shouting activists, the desperate bosses, and he knew that nothing would ever be the same. He raised his hand, calling for calm. This is just the beginning, he said, his voice strong and sure. Together, we will build a future they can't steal. The cameras followed him as he stepped down from the podium, his head held high. The crowd surged behind him, their voices blending into a single, unstoppable force. The days after the conference room explosion felt like a blur. Traoré barely slept, his mind a storm of worry and regret. The faces of the people he'd promised to help haunted his dreams. But nothing could have prepared him for the betrayal. That came next, He found out one evening in the cramped office where he and his small team had gathered to plan the next steps. Papers were scattered everywhere, maps pinned to the walls with red markers highlighting areas of corruption. The air was thick with tension. Traoré's closest friend Idrissa was there too, his oldest ally, the one who had stood by him since their school days. Idrissa's dark eyes always held a spark of mischief, but tonight they seemed dull, hollow. Traoré was studying a bank statement when he noticed a small note scribbled in the margin. It was in Idrissa's handwriting. At first it looked like nothing, a simple reminder. But then Traoré saw the names circled and the numbers copied in neat lines, numbers that matched the boss's secret accounts. His stomach dropped. He turned slowly to Idrissa, his voice trembling. "Idrissa, why?" Idrissa's face crumpled. Tears filled his eyes. "I didn't want to, Traoré," he whispered, his voice broken. "They came to my house. They threatened my family. They said they'd kill my mother if I didn't give them what they wanted. I thought I could protect you, tell them only what they already knew. But it wasn't enough. I'm so sorry." Traoré's chest tightened. His best friend, his brother, in all but blood, had betrayed him. He felt anger, confusion, and a deep sadness all at once. The room seemed to spin. "You were the one person I trusted more than anyone," Traoré said, his voice rough. "All this time you were helping them?" Idrissa shook his head, tears streaming down his cheeks. No, I swear I never wanted to hurt you. I was trapped. They had eyes everywhere. I was scared." Traoré's fists clenched at his sides. Every muscle in his body ached with rage and disappointment. But then he remembered his father's words. "This fight is bigger than any one of us." He turned away, trying to breathe, his mind racing. How could I have missed this, he thought. How many other people have been forced to betray their own? He looked back at Idrissa, who was now sobbing, his hands shaking. "You're still my brother," Traoré said softly, though it hurt to say it. "This system didn't just steal our money, it stole our trust, but I won't let it break us. I forgive you, Idrissa. I forgive you because I know you're as much a victim as I am." Idrissa looked up, his eyes wide with disbelief. You forgive me?" Traoré nodded. His voice trembled, but he meant every word. "I need you now, more than ever. We can't let them win by tearing us apart. We fight together, or not at all." Idrissa buried his face in his hands and sobbed. Traoré placed a hand on his friend's shoulder, feeling the weight of their shared pain. But the betrayals didn't stop there. Later that night, Traoré's phone buzzed with a call from his mother. Her voice was trembling, almost too soft to hear. "Traoré, someone left a note at our door," she whispered. They said if you don't stop, they'll come. For us. And your sister, she's been bullied at school. They call her names. She's scared to go back." Traoré felt his heart crack open. The image of his sister, bright-eyed and full of dreams, now cowering in fear, was too much to bear. He pressed a hand to his forehead, tears blurring his vision. "Mama, I'm so sorry," he whispered. "I never wanted to bring this to your door. I thought I could protect you." His mother's voice was steady, though he could hear the tremble beneath. "My son, you have always been our hope. We are proud of you. Don't let their threats silence you. Your father would have said the same." Traoré closed his eyes, remembering his father's rough hands, his warm smile, the stories he told of fighting for the people. "Never back down," his father had said on his deathbed. "Even if it costs you everything." Now everything felt like it was on the line. His family, his friends, even his own soul. He spent that night alone in the small apartment he called home, staring at the cracked ceiling. Every sound outside, every footstep, every car door made his heart race. He thought of Idrissa's tears, his mother's trembling voice, his sister's fear. He thought of the children in the villages whose futures were stolen by the bosses. Greed, is it worth it, he wondered? Is this fight worth all this pain? But then he remembered the look in that young girl's eyes at the conference, the one whose brother had died in the mines. He remembered the chants of the youth who carried signs with his name. He remembered his father's last words. Promise. Me you'll fight. Traoré sat up, his face wet with tears but his eyes hard with determination. He thought of Idrissa, his brother in struggle, who had also been a victim of fear. He thought of his mother and sister, who deserved a world free from threats. He wiped his face and stood. They can threaten me, he whispered, but they will never break me. The next morning he met Idrissa in the same office. Idrissa's eyes were red and swollen. He stood when Traoré entered, but Traoré shook his head and pulled him to a hug. No more secrets, Traoré said, his voice firm but gentle. We fight together or we don't fight at all. Idrissa nodded, his voice cracking. Together, he agreed. As they turned back to the maps and documents, Traoré felt a new strength in his heart. He knew the road ahead would be hard, filled with shadows and fear. But he also knew he wasn't alone. He looked at Idrissa, at the other activists gathering around them, at the small team who had stayed despite the threats. In their eyes, he saw hope. In their voices, he heard the future. He took a deep breath. They tried to divide us, he said, his voice steady. But they forgot one thing. We are stronger together, and we will never stop fighting for what's right. The sun rose over the city with a warm golden glow that felt different today, brighter, almost electric. Traoré stood at the window of his small apartment staring at the street below. The usually quiet road was now a river of people. Their voices blended into a single powerful chant that rose like thunder. Freedom, justice, Traoré, freedom, justice, Traoré. His heart beat fast. He felt a mix of pride, fear, and something he hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. He turned and looked at Idrissa, who was scribbling last-minute notes for Traoré's speech. Idrissa's hands shook, but his eyes were steady. They're waiting. For you, he said, his voice thick with emotion. Traoré nodded, his throat dry. He had faced countless threats, betrayals, and losses to get to this moment. But he also knew this was bigger than him. This was for every mother who had gone to bed hungry, every child who couldn't go to school, every worker who had been robbed of their wages. This was for them all. He stepped outside. The noise hit him like a wave. Reporters, activists, families, thousands of people stood shoulder to shoulder. Some held signs with his name, others waved homemade flags and banners. Camera crews were everywhere, capturing every tear-streaked face, every clenched fist raised high. Traoré climbed onto a makeshift platform. The crowd hushed as he raised his hand. He scanned the sea of faces, seeing fear and courage all mixed. Together, he took a deep breath and spoke. My brothers and sisters, he began, his voice trembling but strong. Today we stand here not as enemies of this land, but as its true children. For too long a few greedy men have stolen from us, lied to us, and tried to break our spirits. But look around. Look at this power. This is our strength. This is our revolution. The crowd erupted in cheers. Tears streamed down faces. Traoré paused, letting the sound wash over him. Today, he continued, his voice rising, we show them that their time is up. We show them that the people cannot be silenced. We show them that justice will come no matter how long it takes. The chants grew louder. Justice, justice, justice. Just then, a group of international journalists pushed their way through the crowd, cameras rolling, their microphones pointed at Traoré. Is it true, one of them shouted, that you have evidence of the boss's crimes? Traoré's jaw tightened. Yes, he said, and the world will see it. He raised a folder high in the air. Bank records, secret accounts, documents showing their corruption. We have it. All. The reporters' eyes widened, and they began broadcasting live. Within minutes, the story spread across the globe. Screens in homes and shops lit up with breaking news. Corruption exposed, bosses' secrets revealed. In the crowd, a ripple of excitement and disbelief spread. Some people gasped, others hugged each other. Tears mixed with laughter. For the first time, the bosses were truly on the defensive. Just then, sirens wailed in the distance. Police vehicles rolled through the streets. Some officers looked grim, but others seemed relieved, like they'd been waiting for this day too. A commanding officer approached Traoré. He was a tall man with tired eyes and a heavy badge. "We've got warrants," he said. "We're taking them in. It's about time someone stood up to these men." Traoré felt a rush of gratitude. "Thank you," he said simply. The officer nodded and moved on, organizing his team. One by one, the bosses were led away in handcuffs, their heads bowed. Some spat curses. Others kept silent, their faces pale. The crowd cheered as each one passed. A mother held her child on her shoulders, pointing. "See, my love? That's what justice looks like." Traoré felt tears fill his eyes. He remembered his father's face, the strength in his voice. "Promise me you'll fight." He had kept that promise. Later that day, Traoré stood with community leaders in a small town hall. The air was thick with excitement and possibility. Yunbai. The air was thick with the smell of sweat and dust, but the cheers of the crowd felt like a promise that everything Traoré had fought for wasn't in vain. He stood on the makeshift stage, the wooden boards creaking under his feet. His eyes swept over the sea of faces, some smiling, some tear-streaked, all filled with a mix of hope and uncertainty. He took a deep breath, steadying himself against the nerves that still rattled inside him. The bright lights of cameras flashed, capturing every movement, every breath. The world was watching now. Every word he spoke would echo far beyond this moment. He lifted the microphone, his voice low at first but growing stronger with each word. "My brothers and sisters," he began, his voice trembling with emotion. "What we've done here today is only the beginning." The crowd erupted in cheers. A young boy sitting on his father's shoulders waved a small handmade flag, his smile wide and bright. Traoré's eyes found the boy's and held them for a moment. "For you," he thought. "For every child who deserves a future." He continued, his voice firm and clear. "We've shown the world that we will not be silenced. We've taken the first steps toward justice. But we must not be fooled into thinking the battle is over. No, my friends, this is only the start." He paused, scanning the crowd, letting the weight of his words sink in. The noise settled into a hush of anticipation. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. "Today we have exposed the lies and the corruption that held us down," he said. "But there is a bigger enemy out there, one that stretches beyond our borders. It lives in boardrooms and private jets. It hides behind numbers and bank accounts. It's the system that tells us we're small, that our voices don't matter. But we've proven that our voices are powerful." A murmur rippled through the crowd, a mix of anger and determination. Traoré clenched his fist, his eyes fierce. "Some of the bosses have been arrested, yes, but many more remain. They hide in the shadows, using their wealth to twist the laws and silence the truth. Even now, powerful forces in the financial world are resisting our fight for justice. They think they can wait us out. They think we'll grow tired, that we'll turn on each other." He let the silence hang heavy, then leaned forward, his voice low but strong. "I tell you this, we will not break, we will not turn on each other, because the power of the people, the power of us, is stronger than their lies. We must be ready for the battles still to come." In the crowd, a woman clutched a child close to her chest. An old man wiped tears from his eyes. A young worker, his hands calloused from years of labor, raised his fist high. Traoré's voice softened, becoming more reflective. "I've thought about my father a lot today," he said, his eyes distant. "He gave everything for this fight, even his life. I've felt the weight of his sacrifice on my shoulders every day. And sometimes I wondered if I was strong enough to carry it." His voice caught. He closed his eyes, taking a shaky breath. "But then I look at all of you. I see your faces. I see the same courage he had. And I know now, we are all carrying his dream. We are all carrying the dream of every mother who stayed up late sewing uniforms for her children. Every father who worked 2 jobs so his family could eat. We carry the dreams of every child who deserves to live without fear." He lifted his gaze, his eyes shining with tears but fierce with resolve. I promise you this. I will keep fighting. I will not rest until every boss who stole from us is held accountable, until every child can go to school, until every family has enough to eat. I will not stop. Will you? The crowd's response was a roar of approval, a single voice made from thousands. Yes, they shouted. Yes, yes, yes. Traoré's heart swelled with pride and fear all at once. He raised his hand, calling for quiet. But I can't do this alone, he said. I need you, every one of you. Will you stand with us or stand aside? The choice is yours. Together, we are unstoppable. But divided, we risk losing everything. A hush fell over the crowd, eyes locked on his. The decision was clear. Look around you, Traoré said. See the faces of your neighbors, your friends, your brothers and sisters. They are your strength. We are stronger together. And together we can build a future that is fair, that is just, that is free. He paused, taking one last look at the sea of faces, the faces that gave him strength. The fight has only begun, he whispered, more to himself than to them. But the microphone carried his voice, and the crowd heard it. A promise and a challenge all at once. As he stepped back from the microphone, the crowd erupted in cheers. Drums began to beat in the distance, and chants of freedom rose once more, shaking the air with hope and determination. Traoré stood still, his heart pounding with both fear and excitement. The battle ahead would be harder than anything he'd faced before. He knew that, but he also knew he wasn't alone. He glanced back at Idrissa, who nodded, his eyes fierce with pride, and then he looked out over the crowd, his people, his family, his strength. He clenched his fists, a determined smile playing on his lips. Let them come, he whispered under his breath. We're ready. The crowd roared, and the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the sky in a wash of gold and crimson, a symbol of endings and new beginnings all at once. And in that moment, Traoré knew that no matter what came next, they would stand together. Because the fight had only just begun.